One trade deal just fell apart, and now the United States and Canada are moving toward another major tariff confrontation. After weeks of negotiations, the talks collapsed and new 50% U.S. tariffs went into effect on a range of Canadian goods. Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada will answer with tariffs of its own, dollar for dollar. And that raises a much bigger question. Is this really a strategy to protect American workers, or is it another move that could ultimately make life more expensive for American families? Joining us now is Arizona Congressman Greg Stanton. He represents a state with deep economic ties to Canada, and he has been outspoken about protecting North American trade. Congressman, good to see you again. How do you look at this latest breakdown with Canada? Because these aren't two economies operating independently. American manufacturers, farmers, retailers, and consumers are connected to Canadian supply chains every single day. So, what does this latest escalation actually mean for the American consumer? Well, first of all, we need to be very clear about what happened with the president's earlier tariff program. The Supreme Court ruled in February that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act did not give the president authority to impose tariffs under that law. And instead of ending the broader tariff push, the administration moved toward other legal authorities to keep imposing tariffs. That's an important distinction. The latest Canadian tariffs are being imposed under a different provision of federal trade law, not the authority the Supreme Court struck down. But here's the problem. Tariffs don't simply disappear. Somebody pays them. And when the cost of imported goods rises, American businesses have to make a choice. They either absorb the higher cost, reduce their margins, or pass some of that increase along to consumers. And that is happening at a time when families are already demanding lower costs. That's why this debate matters so much. The United States and Canada have one of the most deeply integrated economic relationships in the world. And the USMCA was supposed to provide stability for American workers and businesses operating across North America. Greg Stanton has been pushing the administration to preserve that agreement, warning that prolonged uncertainty threatens jobs, raises costs, and weakens North American competitiveness. Instead, we're now seeing another round of uncertainty. And Canada has already said it will retaliate. The latest 50% tariffs cover roughly 5% of Canadian goods imported into the United States, so economists don't expect these particular tariffs alone to transform the entire American economy. But the bigger danger may be the retaliation that follows. Because once both countries start raising tariffs against each other, businesses have to start planning around uncertainty. And uncertainty is expensive. Now, let's turn to Iran. Iran's president, Masoud Pezeshkian, is claiming that the world has accepted that Iran defeated the United States in the war. Obviously, Tehran has every reason to present the conflict that way. But the more important question is what comes next. The Trump administration is now talking about a major economic campaign against Iran, with the stated goal of forcing Tehran to end its nuclear program and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And that strait matters enormously. It is one of the world's most important energy choke points. If it remains effectively closed, the consequences don't stop in the Middle East. They reach global energy markets, shipping, businesses, and ultimately consumers. And that is why this conflict has become much bigger than a military confrontation between two countries. It has become an economic problem for the entire world. And while Washington and Tehran continue trading claims about who won, American service members have also been dealing with the consequences of an extraordinarily long deployment. The USS Abraham Lincoln has spent more than 200 consecutive days at sea, with reports raising concerns about mental health, living conditions, and supply shortages aboard the carrier. The ship has roughly 5,000 sailors and Marines on board, and the deployment has become a major political issue in Washington. That brings us to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. Critics argue that the administration should have responded more aggressively to concerns from sailors and their families. The Pentagon, meanwhile, has pushed back on some of the reporting and emphasized the resilience of the crew. But there is a larger leadership question here. When American service members are deployed for extraordinary lengths of time, who is responsible for making sure they have the support, supplies, and conditions they need? These are not abstract political arguments. These are men and women serving thousands of miles from home, and their families are watching everything that happens. Now there's another controversy surrounding the Pentagon, this time involving Jennifer Hegseth, the Defense Secretary's wife. Recent reporting has described her as playing an unusually prominent advisory and communications role around the Pentagon. She has reportedly attended meetings, traveled with her husband, and participated in discussions involving senior officials. The Pentagon has defended her involvement, but questions have been raised about where the line should be drawn when someone without an official government position is present around sensitive national security discussions. And that's where the issue becomes serious. If someone is advising a cabinet secretary on communications strategy, that's one thing. But national security meetings are different. Access to sensitive information is supposed to be based on authorization and need to know. So the concern isn't simply that the defense secretary's wife is helping her husband. The concern is whether anyone without the appropriate official role or clearance is being allowed too close to information and decisions that affect national security. That's a question the Pentagon has to answer clearly. And then there is the 2026 House election. Democrats are making a major argument that the real battle isn't necessarily about the loudest ideological candidates making headlines. It's about the competitive districts, the seats that could actually determine who controls the House. Greg Stanton, who chairs the new Democrat Coalition Action Fund for the 2026 cycle, has been emphasizing candidates who can compete in difficult districts and appeal to voters beyond traditional Democratic strongholds. Look at Arizona. Joanna Mendoza is a Marine Corps veteran and former drill instructor running in Arizona's 6th District, one of the country's closely watched House races. She has already secured the Democratic nomination and is preparing for the November election. Then there's Florida. Leila Gray, a retired Army brigadier general, won the Democratic nomination in Florida's 13th District. She now moves on to a general election race against Republican incumbent Anna Paulina Luna. And those are exactly the kinds of races Democrats believe could determine control of the House. Not races where one party is already overwhelmingly favored. The competitive districts. The districts where voters have supported Donald Trump before, but could still choose a Democratic congressional candidate. That's the strategy. Win enough of those seats, and Democrats don't just gain a few more members of Congress. They could take control of the House. And if that happens, the consequences would go far beyond one election night. A change in House control would mean a different committee structure, different investigative priorities, and, most importantly, a different balance of power in Washington. That's why these races matter. The Canada tariff fight, the Iran conflict, the Pentagon controversies, and the midterm elections may look like completely separate stories. They're not. They're all part of the same bigger question. What direction is American policy taking, economically, militarily, and politically? And with the 2026 midterms approaching, voters will ultimately have the final say. We'll see how it all plays out.